I think everybody likes new things, and golfers are certainly no exception to that. I know I like going and window shopping at the stores to check out the newest and greatest equipment. And golf is really unique in that I can watch my favorite players on tour every weekend and see what they're playing, and then turn around and go and buy the same equipment for myself later on that day. It seems like the major equipment manufacturers are putting out new sets of clubs every year, sometimes two new sets a year. There's always a newer and better and longer driver or set of irons or a more forgiving putter. And yet, despite all these new things, how can it be there's a set of irons that, despite being released 40 years ago, are so popular you can still find them in bags of players all over the world? And I've got one of those irons right here today. It's the best-selling golf club of all time. It's the Ping I-2. And today I'm going to give you a little bit about the history of these clubs. The history of the Ping I-2 goes back to Ping founder Karsten Solheim, who long before he ever designed the I-2s had a long reputation for innovation in golf club design. Solheim, who's an engineering by training, took a different approach to golf club design when he started creating clubs in the garage of his Redwood City home in 1959. He found early success with putters, and the iconic Ping Answer putter, released in 1966, was a stark departure from the traditional blade putters of the 20th century, and is easily one of the most copied designs today. His irons were also produced in a different way than most of them at the time. Back then, most irons were forged, which means a solid block of steel was taken, and it was stamped and ground and milled away until an iron shape was formed. But Solheim opted for investment casting, which means a mold of the iron was produced and a liquid metal was injected inside. This streamlined the process and was much less labor-intensive. It's just one of the ways that Ping started off by putting function over form in their golf club design. Early Solheim designs, like the K1, released in 1969, already had some of the key features that the I-2 would eventually boast. They were cast from 17-4 stainless steel and used perimeter weighting, which pushed much of the weight of the club to the edges, especially the heel and the toe, leaving the characteristic cavity in the back of the iron. This made the irons much more forgiving, especially for amateurs. You see these same characteristics in the direct predecessor of the I-2, the Ping I irons, which retailed in 1978. All of these improvements in technology came together in 1982 with the release of the Ping I-2 irons, and this is a sand wedge from the series. You can see we still have that huge cavity back, lots of weight in the heel and the toe, and they're cast, so it doesn't get a lot of the bag chatter you might see in a forged club. They hold up really, really well over time. You see a lot of the same characteristics many, many years later. This is a G20 iron, which in a lot of ways looks really similar. The I-2 had a lot of offset to address. It was really a massive amount for the time, and the characteristic high toe, which was present in a lot of other Ping designs, like the Ping Zing series. The high toe has shown up in a few popular new wedges as well, like the Callaway Mac Daddy 4, Phil Mickelson grind, and the TaylorMade high toe. The I-2s were one of the first clubs to offer pitching wedges, sand wedges, and lob wedges, which was very unique for the time. Although the clubs were a lot weaker in loft than today's offerings, a pitching wedge was about 49 degrees of loft, which is about a club weaker than today's. They also have a very nice, wide, easy-to-hit sole, which work great out of the sand especially. The I-2s were also Ping's first set to be offered cast out of beryllium copper alloy, which looks outstanding and has amazing feel. While safe once cast, beryllium copper dust is quite toxic, so the manufacturing of these clubs ended in the late 1990s. The I-2s, of course, were insanely popular. They were sold through pro shops initially at first only, and each pro shop had to ration the number of sets they got just to keep up with demand. They were fully customizable, from the length to the grip size to, of course, the lie angle, using Ping's revolutionary color code system. I don't think many other players would necessarily know what lie angle they have on their irons, but with Ping you've got the color dot, which helps you out with that. And they weren't cheap either. A new set, 3-iron through pitching wedge in the mid-1980s, assuming you could find them, cost you about $400, which is closer to $2,300 today. But nothing this popular could exist without some controversy, and to get a sense of this, all you have to do is look at the face. The I2s went through a number of different iterations of grooves. V grooves were found in the original release irons from 1982 to 1984, and are still conforming and allowed under USGA rules of golf. The issue that Ping faced with the manufacture of V grooves is that they were difficult to produce to the demanding specifications enforced by the USGA. So Ping made a change in 1984 and released I2s with U grooves, a design that stuck around until 1985, only about a year in total. These U grooves had sharp, right-angle edges that really increased the spin imparted to the ball, especially out of the rough. These grooves were so sharp that some customers actually started to complain because in the era of soft balata-covered balls, sharp grooves meant damaged golf balls. Ping responded by changing the groove design once again, this time creating what are dubbed square grooves. Here the edges of the grooves have a radius, which still gives plenty of spin, but were kinder to golf balls. These square grooves continued to be produced until 1990. They were loved by amateurs because they were easy to hit and you got a ridiculous amount of spin. A young Tiger Woods used a Ping I2 2-iron to win the 1990 US Junior Amateur. They're also enjoyed by a number of professionals as well. Bob Tway used an I2 wedge out of the sand on the 18th hole to win the 1986 PGA Championship at Inverness. There isn't much better product placement than that. Unless you count a 26-year-old Mark Calcavecchia hitting a Ping I2 8-iron from 150 yards out of deep rough at Eagle Trace, the 1987 Honda Classic. The ball hit the green and spun back. That shot prompted some of the most prominent names in golf, including Jack Nicklaus and Tom Watson, to call the grooves unfair. And it marks one of the first times that a golf club like the Ping I2 started getting the industry and the governing bodies thinking about the way design pushed the boundaries of the rules of golf. And so it was that on January 1st, 1990, a new decade brought in a new rule from the USGA and the R&A. The grooves on the Ping I2 and other clubs like it were deemed too close together and gave the players an unfair advantage in accuracy. This prompted Karsten Solheim to sue the USGA. Solheim claimed that accepted engineering practice was to measure from the wall of the groove, not the edge of the groove, on the face of the club. He claimed prejudice against his manufacturing process, and the suit begat all sorts of legal challenges that would persist. A settlement was finally reached in 1993 that saw the I2 models produced prior to April 1st, 1990, being allowed in competitive play, and Solheim receiving a rumored $100 million in damages. In return, future I2 irons would need to be modified, changing the groove width to a smaller groove with more spacing to satisfy the USGA. The result was the Ping I2 Plus model, which is what I have an example of here. The distinctive plus sign lets you know that this club is conforming. So already the Ping I2 had a pretty impressive resume, being a golf club that changed the rules of golf. But as the 1990s led into the 2000s, a new style of golf emerged on the PGA Tour. It was the bomb and gouge era, where players were looking for increased distance off the tee with their drivers, giving up some accuracy, knowing that they'd be able to wedge it close with some of the new wedge designs, without having to worry about being as accurate on the fairway. This led the PGA Tour, who saw an increase in greens and regulation stats, even though there's a decrease in fairways hit, to once again re-examine grooves in an attempt to make the game more fair. In August of 2008, the USGA released a formula for manufacturers that limited the volume of grooves in the club face, and it also provided regulations around the way radiusing was done in grooves and wedges. They also announced that by 2010, it would be up to the PGA Tour to decide if clubs produced before this rule would be allowed in play. This was called the Conditions of Competition rule. Of course, the Ping I2 would be exempt from this because of the 1993 legal settlement, and this led a lot of players to start to revisit these old clubs, especially the wedges, and you started to see them show up on tour again. This led to some unpleasantness, which came to a head in January of 2010, when PGA player Scott McCarron gave an interview detailing what he thought about future Hall of Famer Phil Mickelson using an I2 lob wedge in competition at Torrey Pines. McCarron is quoted as saying, "I think it's cheating. All those guys should be ashamed of themselves for doing that. As one of our premier players, Mickelson should be one of the guys who steps up and says this is wrong. And I just think it is amazing that after over 30 years, there are still people talking about how good this club was, so good that maybe it was too good and shouldn't be allowed in professional tours. When I was a teenager, I got a subscription to Golf Digest. And even though this was in the mid to late 90s, you could flip through this, and I did a lot of flipping through and reading these on cold, dark winter nights back then, you'd still see a lot of photos of Ping I2s in them. And it always made me wonder what was so great about those clubs that 20 or 30 years later, you would still see them in the pages of a golf magazine. When I grew up and became a teacher and had my first wonderful summer vacation off as an adult, I went to go buy some new used golf clubs, and of course, I went for a set of Ping I2s. I think it's incredible that in an industry which is dominated by a constant deluge of brand new clubs promising you 5 more yards and robot-like accuracy, that you'll drain every putt, that an old set of clubs like this still has staying value. And in fact, the prices for these in the used market are still really high compared to any other clubs from the same point in time. It's a club that has been the source of controversy ever since it was designed and released. It's been incredibly popular for 40 years. And for all these reasons, I think this has got to be the very best golf club ever produced.